said, welcome to Kit 153A of Master the World. I am delighted to be co-presenting this today with Tim Gaiser and myself. Tim, you are with us in glorious New Mexico today?
Yeah, the teeming megapolis of Rio Rancho, which is right next to Albuquerque. And, it's getting to be warm spring here. It was in the 80s last couple of days, so it's going to be air conditioning weather here pretty quick.
Well, I'm here back in San Francisco and it's been off and on. Today is a cool day, but we're expecting a bit of a warm up this weekend. And most importantly, I think we're pretty much past all the rains. Who would have thought that an area that was in drought, San Francisco, where I live, the city of San Francisco actually has transportation, market precipitation higher than Seattle in the last bit of
Wow.
time. So who knew? Anyway, with that, for those of you who are new to MTW, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted that you are on this wine journey with us today. And secondarily, for those of you who are repeats, you know the drill. For those of you who are not, just a quick explanation that Tim and I will alternate wines back and forth as we go through and talk about the wines in the kit. It is a practice by many to have pre-tasted the wines either earlier today or even earlier in the week and then gas them with private preserve or something and then retaste them to listen as Tim and I, in this case, will discuss them. But some of you will be tasting on the fly and that's good. And as we're discussing the wines and tasting them, we'll let them know what we are finding today in the glass, which may be a little bit different than what's on the grid because our palates change every single day, as we know. And when those wines are gridded out, they are a snapshot in time of what the wine tasted like that day at that time, and obviously reflected and manifested on the grids that accompany the MTW tool that we use for tasting. So, being that we don't have Maddie to kick it off today, I'm going to kick it off today. What do you think about that, Tim? And we'll alternate from there. Tim will jump in, talk a little bit about my wines, vice versa, etc. I'm not nearly as eloquent and the great leadoff hitter as we are in baseball season that Maddie is, but we always start by sort of asking yourselves three questions, and you'll see these alongside all six wines. They're just some things to consider as you're going through the wine. These are not necessarily, clues of clues. So it's not, Colonel Mustard with the wrench and the conservatory sort of stuff, but it does give you a sense of things that we are thinking about as we go through the wine. So in this case, is it a fruit dominant wine or an earth dominant wine, which might steer you towards Europe or steer you outside of Europe? What type of alcohol content do we think it is, low, medium, or high, which will give you a sense of how warm the climate could be, how ripe the fruit is giving you, ergo whether it may be fruit dominant or earth dominant, etc. And then finally textural, because those things oftentimes go one, two, and three together. So I'm going to pick up my first glass of wine and give it a sniff and a swirl, and then ultimately a smell, and then I'm going to taste it. I always remind people that one of my tools for myself, as well as a teaching tool for others, is to use the FEW terminology to always look, smell, and taste for a few things. FEW is a wonderful acronym standing for fruit, earth, and wood. And if you find yourself able to address those and those alone for most wines, you're going to be smarter than 98% of the people in the room. So as I go through this, obviously I do want to look at the wine first. And as you do this across a white background here, always good to not confuse yourself by using a colored background. If you had like, I don't know, a paisley tablecloth in front of you, everything would look paisley. So using white is a good thing. And as I'm looking across the wine here, I'm seeing a wine that is clear, probably star bright in nature, nothing floating around or doing anything weird in the glass. The color itself is probably a medium straw by nature, and it's got a little bit of a green subtone to it, or a green secondary color, which was always tell me probably either cooler climate or more recent vintage or not. That green that we see in white wines, obviously you don't see it in red wines, is actually chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, of course, is what keeps organic matter there and what over time oxidizes and loses its green color, and again helps the wine become that sort of more golden or amber color as time goes on. As I swirl it in the glass, and it's important your glass is clean. You might want to pay attention to the tears which are falling down the side of the glass. Your glass has to be perfectly clean, or what they would call beer clean, because if you pour beer in your glass, it's not perfectly clean. You get no head on your beer. If you pour wine into a glass that's not perfectly clean, it's hard for the tears to actually form. They will also not form if there's not a lot of alcohol there. It will sheet more than it forms. But I'm getting what I would say moderate tears here of relatively moderate falling down, which suggests to me, again, without doing anything else, probably a more moderate condition there. But anyway, all the proof is in the pudding or in the nose. So I smell this wine. What am I getting? In the fruit category of the world, my fruit is probably first driven by citrus. I would say it's in that sort of sharper citrus thing there. So lemon, maybe a little bit of lime, maybe a little bit of something. If you wanted to be esoteric, you could probably say, I don't know, loquat, kumquat, yuzu, something like that. But definitely something on the sharper side of things. There is a little bit of tree fruit here, but it's on the, again, less ripe vein. So if it's apples or pears, it's more in the green sense rather than yellow or the brown sense there. There might even be a note of like quince or something like that. In terms of tropicality, things that are sharp, starfruit sharp, maybe a little of unripe or almost green mango, green papaya, green pineapple. Then there's a note of, say, maybe ginger or something like that. And maybe some just soft herbal characters, maybe softly chervilish or lemongrassish or something like that. What I am getting, though, as I move from my fruit into my earth, is a sort of sense of minerality to it there, and also a very soft sense, a latent sense, but pulling up of sort of a, dare I call it, Chateau Exxon character, or a petrol or diesel character in the wine, but very, very light, very, very moderate. Um, and then as far as wood goes, not much. I'm not, if there is wood there, it's really, really old and really, really big. But I would suggest to you that this glass of wine has perhaps never kissed a toothpick, much less hung out in an oak barrel. Anything else that I'm getting here? Definitely all that sharp citrus is making me salivate in the mouth, which suggests to me a sense of probably higher acidity. For those people who think that you can't smell acid, if a wine makes you salivate, chances are that the acid levels are very high. What I'm not getting a lot of when I put my nose in the glass is any sense of burn, because if the wine is relatively rich in alcohol, which would have suggested a thicker, slower tearing, you could also potentially see that reflected in more of a burning sensation in the tip of in the back of your nose there. And I'm not getting that either. So let's go ahead and give it a taste and see if it validates everything we said before. I've got to figure out a way to slurp less noisily on camera. Anyway, the wine itself is dry, and it is not only dry, it's borderline what I would call bone dry, which is sometimes you'll get a wine that gives you very ripe fruit and that sort of sense of quote unquote sweetness that's there, that's usually caused by higher both alcohol and obviously riper fruit. I ain't getting that here. This wine is definitely on the dry side. I would say that the acid is high. I would say that the alcohol level on it is probably moderate, both of which were reflected in what I smelled and what I saw earlier. It carries through fairly long and it's holding on there, but it is definitely more of what I would call sort of a cerebral genre of wines. It's not particularly outgoing and outspoken. It makes you work for it there. This is definitely not a quote unquote easy wine, although perhaps that makes sense when we find out what it is a little bit later. As Madeline would always tell you, and I'm going to have to channel my Madeline today since she's not here, go back in, particularly if this is your first sip of wine for the day, and don't do all of your judgments on your first sip because your palate isn't seasoned yet. You might want to take 2 or perhaps even 3 slurps of wine to really get a sense of both the flavors, the aromatics on it, and most importantly, what your mouth is actually capable of measuring, which is indeed the structure. It's also good, as Tim liked to tell you, to go back afterwards and breathe back out through your nose, because there is a connection between your mouth and your nose, the retronasal passage, and getting that happening. Most of what we smell, or taste rather, is what we smell, because if you've ever had a head cold before, or allergies happening in this time of year, you can't tell the difference between filet of sole and shoe sole. So I have a wine here that's sort of on the leaner side, bright, tart acid, citrus and underripe tree, perhaps even a little bit of stone, more apricot than anything, or maybe a little bit of plum, fruit, but sort of lean in the palate, a little bit shrill on the acidity, bright, long, and making me work. So, with that said, let's take a look at what our options could be. For those of you who are familiar with us, you know the drill. For those of you who are new to us, note that we'll always give you our three options of grape varieties of which they could be. It could be Chenin Blanc, it could be Albarino, or the Portuguese version of Albarino being Alvarinho when you're on the other side of the river in down in Minho as opposed to up north in the Rias Baixas. It could be Riesling, or it could be something else. Now we don't say the other there just because we say other, but if you are thinking it could be something else other than the three varieties that's there, put it in the chat or vote when you vote later. We can always talk about it. You know, these are not gotcha games, but we really want to help you build your palate, help build your discernment. This is not purely about becoming a Jedi Knight and training for an MS or an MW or CSW or whatever it is that you want to be when you grow up in the world of wine, but simply helping you discern better, learn better, understand your markers more, etc. The varietals are always related to regions on the screen, so we will always have two what we call older world or generally European answers to that, or newer world, which are everything that's essentially non-European there. I realize that that vernacular is very important to some of you, not as important to others of you. Those words are playing around as we're changing, but it gives us some geographical senses of where to land our plane when we do that. And then, of course, other could be another country, another region, or whatever that is not listed there, etc. So with that said, we're going to put the poll up, which allows you to vote. So this is 100% completely anonymous, not only to you, but also to Tim and myself. We don't know who is voting for what they're doing, etc. So go ahead and vote and pick a grape variety that you might think it is and pick an appropriate associated region. Or again, if you've got the courage and you want to do that, put other and then maybe slip it into what's doing there. Chenin Blanc, we know you'll find in, of course, France. You might find a little bit in Australia. You'll find a ton of it in South Africa, where really it had been for the longest period of time the leading grape. Now I would tell you it's more of the signature grape of that country. There's a lot of Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc there, but it's a very associated grape there. Albarino and Alvarinho, of course, would be associated with, in this case, Portugal, although Spain could be an option if you voted other. And then Riesling, you would find in France, you could find it in Australia. You might find it in some other places there, but chances are, if you got it there, it's there. So with that, I'm going to shut the voting down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's see what the doctor ordered. So most people have ended up in Riesling land, a couple of you in Alvarinho land, a couple of you in Chenin land, about the same amount there. Nobody in other land, and most of you who ended up in Riesling land. Looks like a lot of you associated potentially between France and Australia. Looks like the vote was sort of split. More old worldian, 67 versus a third in the newer world parts there. And that's good stuff. So let me just sort of take you a little bit of a sense through that, and then we'll end up where we are. So the Rieslings had it, and I think that there were a lot of clues as to the variety there. Chenin Blanc, whether you're in South Africa or whether you're in France, is going to be a little bit more in that sort of juicy fruit gum and really appley vein, but probably riper apple and not so much the bite on it, break your teeth apple that is probably more the kind I would have associated with this wine. Albarino and Alvarinho, also good calls with respect to structure, the lack of wood, etc. But you would have gotten definitely a much stronger stone fruit and tropical note here. Here, things were a little bit on the leaner side. Certainly, the Alvarinho part of the world is not quite as ripe as what you would find in the Rias Baixas part of the world, but nevertheless, it has a bit more stone fruit. So with that said, let's go ahead and get in our plane. We're going to start at my house today because I'm starting and, well, we're at my house. And so we're going to hop on our plane and see where that takes us. For those of you that are new to us, we always do sort of this quick little Google Earth discovery, number one, because we all like virtual reality rides, and number two, because it does give us a sense of where we're physically situating. So we're taking a very long, long flight, and we're not only going 13 plus hours on the plane away on a relatively direct flight, I would say. But certainly we're taking a long flight and then probably a car ride into Australia, into South Australia, into the Vale, Pusey Vale in this case, not the Vale as in the Vales of McLaren Vale or Clearwater Vale or whatever, but a beautiful part of the world in Australia. And the Pusey Vale winery, which sits atop the Eden Valley, which sits atop the Barossa Valley in the Greater Barossa in Australia. So it's important to note that a lot of people are used to just saying Barossa Valley, but the Barossa itself is encompasses both the Barossa Valley, but also the Eden Valley, and the two of those together form the Barossa. The Eden Valley is known for its altitude, so it really sits further higher up there. It's where you can get a lot more interesting white wines because of the cooler climate and the longer growing season thermal amplitude. When you get down into the Barossa Valley itself, things tend to be a bit warmer here. So the winery, as I alluded to before, is the great Pusey Vale Winery. Pusey Vale is a winery that dates back to 1847, when at one point in time when it sort of formed as a winery, it was sourcing its budwood, as most people were doing, from New South Wales at the time, and planted with that. So it's 177 years old, and there are most of the plant material over time has been repropagated from their own massal selection. So the Riesling that we're seeing here is really Riesling that has DNA that dates back some 177 years. Eden Valley sits at about 820 feet above the Barossa, as I alluded to before. And Pusey Vale, which is not only a winery, but it's completely estate fruit. They don't buy any fruit other than what they're working from there, make various different cuvées that are there. They make their core Pusey Vale Riesling. They make a Contours Riesling, which the left side of the photo there shows comes from the Contours part of the vineyard. They make a 1961 block Riesling, which are literally vines that date back to 1961, and then they assemble the wines together in this lovely assemblage core Riesling that they make here. Eden Valley Riesling, for those people that want to know the difference between Eden Valley and Clare, Eden Valley definitely tends to be leaner and meaner. Clare that tends to be a little bit riper and rounder, so you're going to get more of that stone fruit and riper tree fruit character, whereas Eden Valleys tend to be more in the limey sort of side, in the citric side of things. All of the so-called petrol notes, which you may or may not find, two things happen. One, they come up with time as the wine gets older. Age brings out the sort of petrol note here that you'll find there. And two, it has to do with how much sun exposure you get directly on the fruit. So if you're leaving a fairly heavy canopy cover and you're protecting the fruit, you're going to get less of it than you are going to get in unprotected fruit. So depending on the year, they may leave it more. A year just may be cooler and it might take more time to develop. But it's not necessarily, particularly in a younger wine, and we can go on to the next the slides here, but this wine is from 2022, so it's not super old. So you're not going to be seeing a lot of it. The wine is overseen by the great Louisa Rose, who is one of Australia's awesomest, can you say that as a word, winemaker. She oversees not only Yalumba, which is her home base, but she's overseen the wines of Pusey Vale since 1996. And this wine is really considered to be a great benchmark wine, and just as a lovely area. Tim, anything to add before we jump forward?
Yeah, so I got to sum up here because I'm going to answer a couple of questions. First of all, Evan, I'm a huge Louisa Rose fan. I think she's one of the great, winemakers on the planet. Her white wine, she's one of the best makers of Viognier anywhere. And then her Rieslings at Pusey Vale are just the best. And you mentioned the Contours, and that's one of my favorite dry Rieslings made anywhere. Okay, so I got to answer two questions here. First, Jerry said Riesling versus Chenin Blanc. Okay, difference there. If it's wines with residual sugar, Riesling is going to have less alcohol, and it's probably going to have TDN, right? And Chenin Blanc, and also, in terms of Australian Riesling, this is really unique Riesling, especially dry Riesling, because there are limestone soils in Clare and Eden, and you don't find those practically any other place where you grow Riesling. Okay, so that sets it apart. To me, also, these wines, and Evan, you mentioned it, when these wines are young, their fruit profile is pretty narrow and they are built to age. This wine, even though it's the lower tier of the two Rieslings PZ Vale makes, this is a 10 to 15-year wine. And the contours, I've had wines that were 30 years old, so they can really age. Okay, how's it different from Alsace Rieslings? Well, obviously, the structure. This is, Alsace Rieslings, more alcohol, more richness, but also probably a broader profile of fruit and earth and mineral together. So that really sets it apart. German Riesling, how's it compared to this? Less alcohol, residual sugar, and just a more delicate wine. So, yeah.
Yeah, these wines are going to be very linear. They're going to be in there where, if it's not so low that it's clearly not Germanic and not so high that it's clearly Alsace and it's dry, you're often more often than not going to end up in Australia. And again, if it's more shrill, probably Eden. If it's a little bit broader, but still within that profile, maybe Clare. Would you agree with that, Tim?
Yeah, I would. Absolutely. Dinah's asking, used to Australian Riesling with a lot of TDN. Dinah, usually true, but with a really young wine like this, maybe not so much. I find that Aussie Riesling in warm vintages have a lot of TDN. And then also the wines, as they get older, have a good deal of it. Yep.
The last thing I would say, and then Tim, you can take over and hop on to wine number two, would be remember where we're at. We're at altitude. If you were actually having Riesling from the Barossa floor, I'm thinking of like Hewitson or something like that, they're gunmetal. It has a lot more TDN when it's
Yep.
young, but again, you're down below. It's a warmer, more exposed climate, and ergo your fruit's going to be exposed to more sunlight. Ergo, the TDN will develop younger. TDN, sorry, that's the Chateau Exxon thing. That's the petrol note.
Yeah.
That's the gasoline note. And if you want to sound cool, Deepu, you tell everybody, you get much TDN in that wine? And they'll all
Yeah.
look at you like you're God. But really, it's really more of that sort of petrol fusel oil character. That's just the technical term.
Yeah. And Deepu, it's for a really long chemical compound. So, all right, let's, in fact, it could be found in maybe some of the other wines in this flight, and we'll find that out presently. Okay, so next up, wine number two, and let's start going through it. Everybody tilt your glass forward against your notes. Notice you can see through it. It's really a straw colored versus yellow. And my expectations is that the wine is A, young, B, the grapes are grown in a cool climate because there's green and unpolished silver in it. And then probably no oak, we'll find that out, and certainly no botrytis. So those are expectations, and that's what the appearance of a wine is good for. You can't take any of that to the bank until you smell and taste the wine, okay? With that, let's smell it, please. Okay, this is really quite an aromatic grape, whatever it is, compared to the first wine. And lots of things going on. So let's start with the fruit. And there's a veritable cornucopia of different fruit. First of all, there's a tart and sweet citrus. I would say there's Meyer lemon, there's lime, and there's some tangerine. All of it is fresh. And maybe there's some juice and peel in terms of what exactly it is. What else? There's apple and pear. You usually find that in white wine, but here there's both green and yellow apple and maybe some Asian pear. And once again, it is fresh and ripe. The tropical fruit, there's a little kiwi and there's a little maybe underripe mango. And then it's not tropical fruit, but there's a little green melon too. And then finally, there's definitely some stone fruit here. So I would say there is white peach and white nectarine, maybe a little green plum. All that fruit, and there's a lot of it, a lot of different kinds, is fresh, ripe, and tart. Okay. So once again, connecting the dots, you look at the color, and it should stand to reason that the fruit is ripe and not very evolved. Okay. Now to the non-fruit, which, as your attorney, I will counsel you once again, saying that is really the main event of what you're looking for. And here there's some important ones. And first of all, there's some flowers, the citrus blossoms, they're above the glass, and they are fresh, really delicate. And then there's a whole host of other things that I would call botanicals. First of all, saying there's radishy, vegetal type things, radish and daikon, and maybe celery. There's also a little bit of lentils, green lentils, and parsley. And finally, I would say the one thing that snapped right away for me is white pepper. So again, that's all a lot of herbal vegetal things, but notice what I didn't say was anything having to do with pyrazines. I just want to make that point because that's important. It's one of the major checks you should do with any white wine when you're blind tasting. Otherwise,
pyrazines for those people out there who are
yeah,
not familiar, just
pyrazines,
like the
thanks.
TDN thing.
Yeah, so thanks, Evan. And hey, this is a pitch because we're going to cover that in the Evil Dwarfs class next week. And pyrazines, methoxypyrazines, it's a chemical compound that you would find in Cabernet Sauvignon family red grapes and also Sauvignon Blanc, since Sauvignon Blanc is a parent of Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay. All right. Earth and mineral, earth, not so much, but mineral, yes. And it's pretty pronounced. Okay, with that, the only other thing I would say, as I suspected, there's no oak on the wine, at least that I can detect. Let's taste it. Mm, wow. Okay, so that's a mouthful. Interesting thing. The wine's got a lot of intensity and a lot of richness, but it's not heavy. In fact, the impression, and I'll get to the structure in a second, but the alcohol in this wine is maybe 12 and a half, which is curious because it has focus, density, concentration, and it's not heavy. We'll talk about that at the end. Otherwise, we can confirm all that stuff. Notice how the fruit all got tartar versus the nose on the palate. Yeah. Now the citrus is all tart. So it's all, lime. There's a little bit of the Meyer lemon is now lemon. White peach, really underripe. Nectarine, same thing. White plum, underripe. What else? It's green apple instead of yellow. And then it's really kiwi. And that's really about it. Maybe underripe pineapple for the tropical. And again, it's all fresh and very tart. All right. Other things on there stand out. The white pepper to me, and take another sip. We're going to take a couple sips of it. But for me, a sip, reveals the white pepper. It's stronger on the palate versus the nose. The vegetable things, radish and daikon especially, that really zing that both of those give you on the palate. The lentils, the parsley, the green leafy botanical notes. So it's all this little family of green botanical type stuff and vegetal. Yeah. And then I'm going to take a sip again because there are two things I'll check. And the first thing is earth. Second thing is presence of oak. And then I'll continue on to the structure. The mineral is really pronounced. And notice I'm squinting. That's the acid. It's pretty high. Yeah. And it's really quite dry. So the mineral is like what happens in the middle of, literally in a sequence between all this fruit, which turns sour, and then the finish, which here is all acid. And it's almost like my tongue is numb. And that's all the mineral, right? And it's literally on the roof of my mouth, right behind my upper two front teeth. And it's very strong. Structure wise, well, first of all, before we get there, no oak whatsoever. This seems like it was done in stainless steel. Maybe after the fact, they moved it into large inert oak to let it settle and age for a few months before they bottled, but that's about it. No oak influence. The acid, I would say, is medium plus or almost high. In fact, I can feel it on the enamel of my front teeth. The alcohol is medium. It's 12.5%. And what else? There's a little bit of phenolic bitterness and some, I would say, low. And yeah, the finish is long. So I just want to point out again, the quality of this wine for something that's not really rich and big and huge is really something. So we will be curious to discover the pedigree of this wine when it's revealed. All right. So with that, let's go to the poll. All right. So your choices are Grüner Veltliner, which is the major white grape from Austria, Torrentes, which is from Argentina, and Salta. And then Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio, obviously Pinot Grigio a little bit lighter from, say, Northern Italy, Alto Adige, and the Pinot Gris possibly from Alsace, right? Or other places. And your choices of place are Austria for Grüner Veltliner, and then Spain, possibly Argentina or Washington, all sorts of things, okay? So everybody cast your votes, vote early, but only vote once. And let's see what happens. Yeah.
Not from Chicago.
Not
Vote early,
from
vote often.
Chicago.
No, I think one of the things I would just sort of reiterate, which is really interesting about this wine, is you talked about the mineral note, which is very strong. I often sense mineral too, Tim, as a textural thing.
Oh, yeah.
Which is sort of like if you were to take, for those of you who are old enough to remember chalk erasers, like you were the person who had to erase it, and you clop them together, and if you get any of that chalk dust in your mouth, particularly if you were the one doing the erasing, it stays in your mouth like a grit. And I find at times
Yeah.
white wines in particular, although I found it in reds and rosés too, if it has a grittiness, it oftentimes accompanies a wine that I have described as being minerally.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good thing. Two people, so Kevin, looking at your note, and Jerry too. I say, so both you guys, I want to say that when I first opened this over an hour ago, which is what we asked people to do with these bottles, I got, a fair bit of sulfur in it. And, when we started it and I started to smell the wine again, the sulfur is dissipated. So Jerry, that could be the funky thing that you got. And Kevin, that could be, you're calling it cat pee, English boxwood. That could be it as well. But now, see, it's, once again, sulfur is fairly heavy in terms of molecules, but it dissipates. And when it does, it's gone. So, all right, here's what we think. 63% of you said Gruner Veltliner. Some said Torrentes, and a few Pinot Grigio. A lot of people went to Austria, those with Gruner Veltliner. And mind you, Gruner Veltliner has grown all over the place. There are several people in Edna Valley making good Gruner Veltliner. Australia, good Gruner Veltliner. Alto Adige, in Italy, good Gruner Veltliner. So it's a fairly adaptable grape. Okay, with that, let's see where we are. Because we're going to hop on Evan's private jet again. And we're probably going to, fly out of Adelaide after it's about an hour and 20 minutes away from Pusey Vale. And I think we got an overnight flight coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see where we're going to go. I don't know which way would be faster. I think you're literally equal distance from getting to Europe either way here. But we're going to go west, and which is something I've never done from Australia. And we're going to end up in Austria. Yes. So those of you that thought because of the white pepper, and we're going to go to the Kamptal, which is the valley of the Kamp River, which is off the Danube River, and what's called Niederösterreich, which stands for Eastern or Lower Austria. And this is Weingut Brundelmeyer. And Willy Brundelmeyer, this guy's a rock star. I mean, Evan, I got to hand it to you. I mean, if we were going to show an Austrian wine, you can't do a lot better than Brundelmeyer. So we are in Kamptal in what's called Leuserberg, which is a village that's literally right on the Kamp River. And Willy Brundelmeyer, again, one of the top, most talented winemakers. And this particular wine is an Erste Lage. It is literally what's called the first growth. And it's a classification which has only been around since 2010. And I'm going to say what the wine is first. So this is a Gruner Veltliner again. It's from Ried, which stands for vineyard, translates as vineyard. Leuserberg is the name of the vineyard. And Erste Lage, which means first growth. And so here we have Austria is following Germany's lead, which is following Burgundy's lead, where in Germany you have the Grosse Lage, Grosses Gewächs. And that is a 4-tiered system in 8 of the 13 regions and 3-tiered. But it's a system where you have regional wines, village wines, and Premier Cru and Grand Cru vineyards. Okay. And in Austria, since 2010, they have what's called the Erste Lage. And I'm thinking they will do the same thing eventually that Germany did, and they will classify their vineyards into Grand Cru and Premier Cru. This is definitely a Grand Cru vineyard. In fact, Brundelmeyer makes at least half a dozen. I'll read them for you. They are Lamm, Lamm, Hefferberg, Leuserberg, Spiegel, Heiligenstein. And if you know anything about Beethoven, that should ring a bell as the Testament of Heiligenstein from 1806, where he writes that he was going deaf, and then Steinmassel. And so this is, again, based on that Erste Lage classification, and that it's based on another classification called the DAC. So this, again, we're getting into geek trivia for wine theory, but we're not going to go here. What I will ask you to do is taste the wine again, because to me, this is such a quality wine, because, again, the alcohol, check, it is 13%, okay? And the wine's really rich, but it's not heavy and it's not weighty because of alcohol. There's no heat. And so what you have is dry extract. You have a really old vineyard, which this is, low yields, which is probably about less than 1.5 tons per acre. And then you have, a wine that's not overly fined and filtered, and you've got a lot of richness and density without being heavy, hence complexity, and hence a wine like this, which you wouldn't expect it would age for 25 years. So great stuff.
Oh, it's amazing. And there's
the team.
Everybody, right? I would just say a couple of things here. I mean, first of all, for those of you who are not super familiar with this grape variety, Gruner Veltliner, memorize this wine. Everything Tim said, all of the clues that he sort of both led you on are also actually in the glass. Sometimes we lead the witness, or we're accused of leading the witness. And I'm not getting it. I'm not getting it. Everything that Tim pointed out there is in the glass. And I would say a couple of things. First of all, the white pepper thing, which is by the way, can be a little bit confusion because of its prickle with sulfur. So every once in a while here it's more of a flavor, not so much of what it's doing to your nose. And there was a hint of that sulfur at the beginning. My nose prickled not because of alcohol, but because of sulfur, and it has subsequently blown off in the glass. But things that you pointed out that are definitely there in the wine to me, at least when I go back and smell it and taste it. Lentil,
Yeah.
for sure, both yellow and brown and a little bit of green, but more yellow and brown in this case. That whole family of celery stuff. So you talked about celery there, but also celery roots, celeriac is there. Celery salt to pick up on that mineral thing. I picked up a little bit there too. And then for those people who are in that sort of like celery on steroids, cardoon. If you've ever had a cardoon, and a braised cardoon, there's an element of it in there, all of which is in that same sort of family. As Tim said before, the radishy, daikon thing is there. All of those elements are there, and they're particularly amplified because it's not often that you have a wine that is harvested at such a low yield. So that dry
Mhm.
extract and the concentration you are going to get are those same flavors that you might find in a more volumed wine, like say, Domani Vacau or something like that, they're terrassen, which is great, but the yields are higher, so those
Yeah.
flavors are a little bit more diluted. Here it is literally almost an essence of Gruner Veltliner flavor, if I could
Yeah.
say so.
All right. So I'm going to answer a few questions here, and these are really good ones from Kevin and from Rebecca and from Mia. So, guys, you're saying that, first of all, Kevin, you say, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc versus this, okay? And then Rebecca and Mia, Chardonnay versus this. So here's what I want you to do. This is a Coravin exercise. So first of all, get a Coravin, right? Second of all, buy really good examples of the wines. And if you're not sure what to get, chapter, I think it's 20 in my book, is nothing but hundreds of lists of producers that you consider. Next, you taste two wines at a time. So you would taste Gruner Veltliner versus Chablis to begin with. And you can see that Chablis in and of itself doesn't have a lot of non-fruit. It just doesn't. Yeah, it's got high acid, it's got some fruit, and it's got screaming mineral, but there's really none of the botanicals that you would find. And Kevin, same thing for New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, I don't know, it's like a gigantic speaker that's a tweeter going like that. And it's screaming pyrazines, which this wine has botanicals and white pepper, but it does not have pyrazines. But once you need to taste them side by side, because if you do, and you do that for a couple of times, hence the need for Coravin, all of a sudden your brain goes, snap, I got this, okay? And you won't confuse them. All
Yeah.
right.
Lower yields are definitely going to do that. But I think it's interesting, and one of the pleasures you get, presuming you have the luxury of having all these wines poured out right now, is go back and try it against the Riesling. The Riesling,
Yeah,
comparatively, the Riesling is a wallflower here. I mean, it will come out in time, and it's a little bit more open than it was before. But and not that I would call Gruner Veltliner, dancing on the table with a lampshade on its head, but in comparison to the first wine, it shows you how reserved young Riesling can be and how it really does require time. Wish that we could show you a 15-year-old Contours Riesling. That would be great, but it'll also show you what it's coming into. I do think the one thing that you can talk about there in context of a few people who did say Chardonnay, while there are no Chardonnay fruit clues or anything like that, the weight of this wine, because of the lower yields, will give you a texture that might be reminiscent a little bit of Chardonnay's weight and texture,
yeah, true.
but the flavor profile is so different. So that's why we do this. This is great. I also want to just go back and say that for $39, which is a lot of money for a white wine, for a wine of this pedigree, this
Yeah,
caliber, this ageability, and this transparency of a variety, uh, I think it's a great value actually for what it is
it
in
is.
that regard. So anyway, all right, guys, and gals, we're going to move now on to wine number three. So I want to again just take a look at this wine against a white background here and note that the wine is perhaps a touch darker than the wine that Tim just came up on, which was certainly a touch darker than the wine that we started with. So maybe here we're pushing into more of a yellowish color, sort of a lighter yellow color, as opposed to something that is more of a straw color. The wine definitely, when I swirl it around, shows some weight and texture. My tears are slow forming. That's there. I definitely get still a touch of green, but not as much as on either of the first two, which would suggest to me a wine that's perhaps a little bit older, or again, a climate that's a little bit warmer. And again, perhaps the presence of a little bit of oak. I don't get, so I'm smelling it quickly, any botrytis here. I'm jumping ahead of myself, but those are the things that again affect color would be age, climate, and then use of oak, potentially botrytis. But I would sort of say age and lifestyle choices, right? Whether one spent time in an oak barrel. All right, let's go ahead and give this wine a sniff. And here's a wine that is very different. Okay, so right off the bat, I am getting a profile of fruit, and I'm getting a lot of fruit here that is very different than what we had before. So whereas we were perhaps dancing away from the land of the green before, here I'm getting a bit of it. And I'm getting a little bit of it in the form of not something that's sort of brash and asparagus-y and stuff like that, but I am getting maybe a little bit of chervil, maybe a little bit of sorrel in there. What I'm also getting is a bit of fruit. So I'm getting grapefruit particularly, and I'm getting both white grapefruit and I'm getting yellow grapefruit. I'm getting both at once the fruit itself, but I'm also getting a bit of the pith and a little bit of the zest on the outside. I'm getting just other ripe fruits too. So I'm going to pick up on maybe some tangerine or mandarin, not completely ripe, but definitely there, but really grapefruit sort of driven, along with maybe a little bit of Meyer lemon, something like that. A lot of it. There are other natures of fruit here in things that grow off trees. I would say pears, once again, yellow, a little bit of green, but perhaps a little bit more on the yellow side. I'm getting a bit of fig in this one, more in the sort of green or Adriatic style. A little bit of stone fruit, but on the underripe side, maybe a bit of plum, maybe a little bit of nectarine. And then again, herbal. And I'm getting citrus blossoms too, a bit of lemon blossom there. And then non-fruit things, Tim likes to always say, we jump in here, maybe a little olive, maybe a little green olive, not black olive. We have a tendency to think of all olives as having darker color, and not a particularly super strong olive. So maybe one of those like Italian Capistrano olives or something like that. There's a little bit of sweet gingery king here, maybe more of that Hawaiian pink ginger and not so much the hard yellow ginger there. And then there's a whole note of other things that are there that are non-fruit. I'm getting a sort of yeasty-ish, soft lees-ish character there. Something that reminds me of like, that, what is that? They call that sesame candy you can buy in the Middle Eastern store, halava, right? A little bit of a halava character to it there. And but a lot going on. And again, that might even be a little bit of oak, which would not surprise me based on the color and the darkness of the color that we saw there earlier, because the fruit is still showing young. It's not marmalady, it's not developed, it's not like that. So interesting combination of winemaking along with core fruit, and the fruit itself might be a single grape variety, but there's enough going on there that it theoretically could be a blend too. Let's go ahead and taste it. The wine has a very bright attack, very grapefruity on the attack, perhaps more in their sort of ripe yellow, pushing pink, maybe pomelo-ish. For those of you who are familiar with pomelo, same family as grapefruit. The wine is very round, though. What's very interesting. So the flavors carry through, but I am picking up a lot more texture than I had anticipated. I was expecting a bit of a leaner wine. This wine is round. It's definitely rich. It's definitely smooth, which would suggest to me two things. Number one, the element of what I picked up before as sort of being that kind of creamy texture could be a combination of some oak in the wine. It could be a combination of some lees and probably a little bit of lees stirring, which is going to give you that sort of sesame seed, sesame candy sort of character there. The acid on it is present, but certainly compared to the first two, not as strong. So it's there, but it also has to carry a lot of weight with the ripeness and richness of the wine. And it also doesn't, again, come off to me as being a necessarily pureness of a singular fruit character, the way the Gruner was in wine two or the Riesling was in wine one. So I might actually lean towards a blend on this one. Medium plus acid, medium plus alcohol, the richest of the three wines we've had before, and definitely a complexity that is not purely fruit driven. So a lot to think about here. We talked about the questions to answer about the suggestion of age and all that. So let's just jump into it. Grape varieties, where could we be? So oftentimes you're going to see, if this is your first time with us, this nature of putting the grape down as a blend. So Pinot Grigio certainly could be a blended grape variety, but more often than not, you're going to find it with by itself. Sauvignon Blanc, on the other hand, could be blended. It could be blended with Semillon, could be blended with Muscadel de Bordelais, it could be blended with both of them. I've seen Sauvignon Blanc with Viognier. I've seen it with a lot of other things. Ditto Semillon, again, flip side of that, could be blended with Sauvignon Blanc, but could be blended as well with other grape varieties and aromatics, other stuff there. Regions, Italy, certainly with our Pinot Grigio and even with our Sauvignon Blanc. We find a lot of it up in the Northeast. France could be all of the above. California could be all of the above. And dare I say, Australia could be all of the above. So take a think on that. Pinot Grigios can be anything from absolute neutral to places like in Alsace where they're going to have some richness and roundness. Usually when they get that ripe, their true color of gray or almost sort of a coppery pinkish color comes through. So think about that in the context of this wine. Um, in California, probably somewhere in between. Sauvignon Blanc has all those clues. The riper the Sauvignon gets, the more citrusy it becomes and the less green it becomes. And then when blended with other grape varieties, it becomes more choir and less soloist. Semillon can range from the sort of bone dry to austere of what you would find in Australia's Hunter Valley to the almost lush character that you're going to find in parts of the New World like California, Washington State, whatever. So do that. And with that said, let's get our voting in 5, 4. I like counting down, Tim. 3, 2, and 1. Get your votes in, and let's see what's going on here. So what do we got? Oops, I don't even know what that is. Let's see, what do we got here? We got Pinot Grigio some. Most people thinking of Sauvignon Blanc blend, literally half of you. A few of you in Semillon blend, which could again be sort of the same thing. A lot of you in France, stylistically, but an equal number or pretty much the same amount of you in California. A few less of you in Italy, a few less in Australia. Again, both of those styles of Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, pure, so either a Sauvignon Semillon blend, SBS, or an SSB, Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend, tend to have a little bit more weight. So as Tim goes through and readies us to answer our questions along the way, let's go ahead and hop in our plane. Let's leave the absolute beauty that is the Comptal and our friends over at Brundelmeyer, who we know and respect and adore, and hop to a new place. We're going to stay in the relative north, that is to say, northern hemisphere, but we are going to move back across continents, and we're going to move back closer to Shea Evan, if you will, and end up back in the glorious confines of California, in the Napa Valley, if you will, and with my good friend Aaron Pott over at Blackbird Vineyards. So this wine is a really, really successful execution, if of a French modeled white Grave, white Bordeaux styled Sauvignon Blanc blend. So what's curious about this is I will save you the trying to guess. You have all these things pointing everywhere. This wine it's a Napa Valley wine. Or I should take it. It's a Knights Valley winery. The fruit from this, however, is primarily driven out of the Carnera. So it's a blend of two. The winery itself sits in Knights Valley, but it is a 2021, so it's got a little bit more age on it, which also suggests the color, but it is also not pure. So it is about 2/3 of Sauvignon Blanc, and the balance of that, not even quite, more like 60% Sauvignon Blanc, and the balance of that is in Semillon. In a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, Semillon is not only going to give you in the northern hemisphere, in California, in Washington, and places like that, it's going to give you that roundness. It's going to give you the texture. It's also going to be where you pick up the tree fruit notes, particularly fig as a character, pear as a character, ripe apple as a character, but usually more pear and all of that. What you are getting underneath the backstop of that, though, is that greenness. But as I mentioned to you before, while you do have notes of sorrel, where you might have a little bit of note of lemongrass or something like that, you are getting the sort of more citric elements of what you're going to find in Sauvignon Blanc, particularly in the North Bay. So that's where you're going to get that grapefruit character. And again, not so much of that bell peppery character, which you're going to generally find in cooler climates further south, down in like western Santa Barbara, Santa Rita, Santa Barbara, Los Olivos, places like that, where they tend to be quite pungent by nature. Winemaker here is the great Aaron Pott. We're going from rock star to rock star to rock star winemakers here. The Blackbird Winery, there's the great Aaron. Aaron has one of the few distinctions I know. There are not that many Californians who are actually winemakers in France, so not so much interns or stagiaires, but he was the winemaker at Troplong Mondot for a long period of time. He was the directeur over at La Tour Figeac for a while, and when he got his France out of him, obviously that leans heavy into his style, and doing that, he came back to California to do that. But the French imprint is clearly there. I think the French imprint, particularly on the Semillon, would have given you a bit more of that lanolin-y, wet, woolish character that you would associate from Semillon from that part of the world. Here it was giving you more of the fig and the fruit elements that you find there. The wine itself was aged in a combination of primarily stainless and a little bit of amphora, and then the balance in oak, but just a lovely effort. And it's called dissonance because it is a distraction and the one different part of his portfolio that is not red. But Aaron is a rock star. And Bill, I would beg to differ. I think the Sauvignon Blanc element. Oh, I no, you're agreeing with me. In the words of Rosanna Dana or Emily Latella, never mind. But it is definitely more on the citric side and not so much on the grassy side. So anything to be said, Tim, before we move into wine number 4?
Yeah, so Evan, great job on that. Kevin, back to your New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc for wine number 2. Okay, so now, Evan, I think you downplayed. For me, the pyrazines are pretty evident. They're not, screaming it in your face like New Zealand. But so Kevin, now compare this Sauvignon Blanc with the Gruner, and you can see the difference is pretty striking. Yeah. Okay, I think we need to get to wine number 4. So now we're going to enter the red wine universe for something completely different. We'll look at our questions. So what does the wine's depth of color suggest about the possible grape variety or family of grapes? Is it a thinner skinned grape or a thicker skinned grape? Second, always, what are the important non-fruit aromas and flavors? That's one of my mantras for tasting. And then finally, how would you describe the texture and quality of tannins in the wine? Because that will become important when it comes to making a conclusion. With that, everybody take the glass in hand, and I'm tilting it over white background, and I cannot read through it. So back to the question number 1, this is a thicker skin grape, whatever it is, okay? And then from there, I would call this a deep ruby. It's very youthful because look at the rim or the edge, and it's like fuchsia or pink purple. So the wine's really quite young. What else about it? The wine stains the glass, which once again points to the fact that it's a thicker skinned grape. And swirling it, and we're looking at tears, legs, marangoni, la-di-da. Interesting for a wine with a lot of depth of color, but the tears, legs, move pretty quickly, and they're relatively thin. So what does that mean? It means it's a really rich, concentrated wine, but a lower alcohol wine at that, which speaks to the climate. We'll find that out. All right, so everybody please smell it. Oh, what I had this picture of a dark chocolate covered black cherry. That's what it smells like. Sometimes we say wine smell pretty. This wine smells pretty, and it smells delicious. Okay. All right. So starting with the fruit, it's kind of a mix of red and dark fruit. So I'll start with the red fruit. It is red cherries, maybe some red plum, maybe some cranberry, and they're all ripe, but they're also tart. And they're fairly fresh too, although there's a little development going on, which I didn't get in the color. What else? Mostly dark fruit. So there is black cherries, black plums, blackberries. And it's a mix of where, the fruit is ripe, but blackberries and maybe black raspberries, there's lift. I'm expecting some acid. And that points back to the legs and tears not being thick or slow. And my suspicion that the alcohol here is not that high, even despite the fact the color and there's some ripeness. What else about it? Above the glass, it's really pretty rose petal and maybe a little lavender. And from there, the non-fruit, we're getting into non-fruit here. And so there's a lot of green stuff here. But it's not overtly annoying and vegetal like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc or something like that. But there is like some tea leaves, there's some laurel, bay laurel, some chives, maybe even some fresh basil. And there's just a hint of green pepper. And from there, then I'll move over into the earth range and there's some brown mushrooms. There's some black licorice. And there's some earth here, but it's pronounced. It's not really overshadowing the fruit. So it's kind of playing second banana. Yeah. And cocoa powder and dark chocolate. And that is oak usage. So there's definitely some oak usage here, but I wouldn't say we're talking about 100% new oak, really small, sexy, expensive barrels. It's a mix here. I'd say it's probably 70-30 used versus new, but there's other oak markers. Oh, there's kind of toast and a little bit of vanilla and some spices, but it's mostly smoke and toast and like cocoa powder and dark chocolate. And that to me, by the way, is French oak. That's just me. Okay. If it's really overtly spicy and vanilla and things like that, I tend to think it's more American oak, but this smells like French oak. Okay. What else? I'll go and taste it. Mm. Okay. That's nice. And the wine, of course, tartans up on the palate. Red wines especially do that from nose to palate. What else about it? The fruit especially gets tartar. So more red fruit. So red cherry, red plum, maybe some cranberry, and they are ripe and tart, but there's also just a tiny little bit of evolution, which speaks to maybe longer time in barrel, or maybe the wine's a little bit older than I first suspected. The black fruit here is blackberries and black cherries and black raspberries. Black fruit with lift, with acid. What else? Yeah, the green stuff really comes through. So there's like tea, there's like bergamot and black tea, kind of like chives. There's basil, there's chervil. There's a little bit of licorice, and that goes right to the licorice that I got on the nose. The brown mushroom, there is some earthiness here, and but it's not a major player. But I do want to say it's from a place where that kind of terroir comes through. And then the smoke and toast is really the main imprint of the oak on the palate, and there's a little bit more than I thought. So structure-wise, another sip. Hmm. So I did the alcohol check. The alcohol here is medium plus. So it's maybe high 13s. If it's 14, it's pushing it. But interesting. So cool climate, red wine here. Okay. And acid salivary glands are working, medium plus. The tannins here, though, and don't confuse it with the acidity, because the acidity is your salivary glands, and the tannin is, the astringency in the back of your mouth, or maybe grape tannins in the front, and there's really no grape tannins here. It's mostly oak tannin, and it's medium plus, maybe. It's not a very tannic grape. So we've got something, red wine with depth of color, darker fruit, cooler climate, a lot of green notes, and the use of oak. And frankly, really well-made wine. And I have to say something that this is a wine that would be really versatile, would age well, but that I would want at the table, because it would work with a lot of different things. So here are your choices. We have Malbec and blend, we have Merlot blend, and we have Syrah or blend. And your place choices would be France, which would certainly work for, well, frankly, all of those. And Italy, which would work for either Merlot or Syrah. Certainly you have in Tuscany, you have a lot of Merlot and Syrah grown, and other places too. And then we have Argentina, if you're going the Malbec route, or Washington State, which would frankly work for all of those things. So everybody vote, see what you think, and we'll see what we have. Yeah, Evan, comments? What do you
No,
think?
just brilliant description as always, Tim. But this wine is just genuinely delicious,
Yeah,
and very, very easy. I think I don't. It would sound pejorative and judgmental to say it was quaffable, but there's
yeah,
just an ease of enjoyment about this wine, and one that dare I use the word crowd pleaser? It's a hard wine not to
Yeah,
like, and I
yeah,
think this would make Aunt Minnie happy. It would make a wine person happy. It would make somebody
yeah.
who's a every once in a while wine drinker happy. And to your point, very versatile at table, particularly given the softness and the right roundness and the well managed tannins. You could
Hmm.
have this with steak. You could also have it with a piece of tuna. It would be
Yeah,
delicious.
yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see the results of the poll. So we were pretty evenly split. We've got Malbec blend, and a lot of people probably went to Argentina for that. We have Merlot blend and Syrah blend. Okay, a lot of people went to France, and then some people went to Argentina, some people to Washington. So let's see where we are. We're going to hop on Evan's jet at the Napa Airport, which is a
Because you can.
fashionable place where the jet setters fly in and out of. And let's see where we go. So I think we're going to head due north.
Yeah.
And it's not a long flight. In
Nope.
fact, we could be there.
And I bet you there were flights that go literally this route. That you could fly
I
from
bet,
Napa
I bet you're
directly
right.
up to the northern part of eastern Washington there.
Yeah. So we are in the Tri-Cities area. That's where the winery is. So this is Bernard Griffin. And this is husband wife team, Deborah Bernard and Rob Griffin. Rob trained at UC Davis and then in 1976 graduated and headed north. And he worked at Preston, which was one of the first wineries in Washington State. And then in 1983, he and Deborah stuck out on their own, and they literally made their first wine from grapes they purchased in the back of a pickup at somebody's winery. And then, within, I would say 5 years, his wines were winning awards at Washington wine competitions. And I think now he could be, if not the most established winemaker in Washington in terms of a continuous track record. I mean, it's over 40 years. I mean, I heard about him in the early years of studying for the exams as just one of the linchpins of Washington wine. And so this is we are in Columbia Valley. This is a Merlot, and this is their 2022 Columbia Valley Merlot. Even though the grapes are sourced from a lot of different places in Yakima Valley and what's considered Columbia Valley proper. What to say about it? This is a screaming deal for red wine and such high quality. It is 80% Merlot and it is 9% Syrah. Very interesting because Rob is a huge fan of Rhone grapes.
So your Syrah people were not wrong.
Yeah, yeah,
What the Syrah
exactly.
saying to them? Yeah.
Yeah. So I know he makes a wine called Côte du Rob instead of Côte du Rhône, which is pretty catchy, and he makes a white and red. And then he makes Merlot and Cabernets, makes superb Cabernets in this really elegant, restrained style that, to me, age really, really well. And what else about it? 13.8 alcohol. Yeah. And about 2,300 cases of this. I think about the high cost, high rent, California Merlots and how good this is for $20. And it's just wonderful wine.
Yeah, no, and they, to your point, I mean, incredible track record, truly a leader and
Yeah.
pioneer in that part of the world. And it reminds you what Merlot can be, which is
Yes.
charming, delicious, approachable, and not necessarily the, we are such a Merlot bashing culture these days, and
Yeah.
we forget about when Merlot achieves, whether at an affordable price point, at the top end, people forget that, great wine like Petrus is mostly is Merlot, 96% Merlot typically.
Yeah.
So at the high end or at this end, it can be just a charming grape, and the tannin management is just almost it brings you in. It's so seductive. It's so tasty. So
Yep.
good stuff. Good description. Love Merlot when it's done well, and this one is done well. So let's move on to wine number 5. Y'all know the drill at this point in time as you're looking at it. Just sort of think about, we always talk about the nature of fruit, and whether fruit is red, whether it's blue, whether it's black. Generally, red tends to be both cooler climate, black tends to be darker climate, blue tends to be fairly unique. Within that, is there anything spicy or different about this wine? Any non-obvious fruit flavors that are there? And then if there are any floral elements that are like that. So anyway, let's go ahead and give it a take a quick look color wise. You've got a wine here that certainly doesn't have the depth of color that the Merlot just had, or if you jumped ahead, because people do that sometimes, The last wine has as well too. So this is what I would call sort of a classic ruby color, and with a sort of pinkish rim, probably medium in concentration. As I swirl the wine around, it's got a very soft staining, almost to the point of not being there, if you will. And the tearing is moderate where it grabs the glass. Nothing stands out. Can't say it's old, can't say it's young. What you can say, though, is it's not going to have the concentration of color necessarily that we had in that last wine or the wine afterwards. All right, give it a swirl in the Smith. Right off the bat, what I notice here, certainly when coming off of the really ripe fruit character that we had in this last wine, is it's not quite as fruit overt. I would actually put it more on the savory side, not to say there isn't fruit there. The fruit there is a little bit more curranty by nature, both red and black. A little bit of cherry, both red and black. And then some other sort of things like cherry tomato. If I could use that one, but tomato is a fruit. Remember that, guys, but not necessarily on the super sweet side of things. There's a bit of black fruit there and the plum thing. And then there is a lot of other non-fruit aromas. And all of those fruits, by the way, that I discussed are on that sort of just right, more savory end, not jammy, certainly not dried, certainly not over the top, but sort of just right and perhaps even slightly on the underripe side of things, but really just at that just ripe thing. Blue floral, bit of lavender for sure, bit of violet for sure. Then there is sort of a little bit of a sort of dried mushroom character to it a bit. Very olivey, black olives, thinking the sort of the sort of like hard dried Niels or Picholine olives there. A little bit of fennel seed actually to be specific, bit of tea, and then we move into the spices, getting a lot of pepper, both on the sort of black peppery side, a little bit of the green peppercorn side for what you make your steak Diane and anything else. And then this sort of undercurrent of licorice, both red and black, but leaning more black here, which sort of speaks to the sort of fennel-y character that we talked about earlier. It is bright by nature, so it's not brooding. There's nothing that suggests to me a strong presence of wood. I'm sure there is wood here, but it is not a dominant character, which suggests either A, larger formats of wood, so probably not barrique, or if the barrique is there, it would be really old, but perhaps more demi-muid or larger size casks and things like that. And again, really more for the oxidative character and a little bit older. All right. And in the mouth, a little bit more color on the tearing than I thought when I just looked back. The wine has a nice firm attack. If the tannins on Tim's wine were sort of round and smooth, these ones are a bit grittier and meaner by nature. It definitely pulling at the sides of my mouth and a bit astringent. The body on the wine is medium. The alcohol, therefore, is probably mediumish as well. Tannins are medium plus, pushing high. Alcohol moderate. My chest cavity isn't burning up, which is reflective of the color and the nature of the fruit not being super ripe, but rather just ripe by where it is. And again, very complex. A lot of stuff going on. The fruit elements, the spice elements, the savory elements, the umami-ish elements. There's a lot going on there. The licorices and all that. And it's still grabbing me, sort of shaking my mouth up. Probably be wonderful to be in uh, partaking in this wine in a few years, and definitely craving some food. This is not sit around, watch the clouds, and watch the sun go by thing. So a very different wine, a very different genre of wines, and a very different personality. Certainly come off wine 4, which was a very classically New Worldian approach. All right, so let's go ahead and see what our options are. We've got Cab Franc, either pure. Again, anytime you see the variety before the blend, it could be that, or it could be a blend. It could be Petit Syrah, fairly girthy and broad wine. It could be a Syrah blended wine, which is not quite as girthy as a Petit Syrah would be. And where it could be other, of course, and we could be Spain, which could be probably more in the Petit Syrah vein. They have both of those there. France, Cab Franc or Syrah. Australia, all of the above. California, all of the above. So let's go ahead and give this a vote. think about what you were tasting. Think about the wines you've had by difference. If you've had Chinon Bourgogne, California Cab Franc, South American Cab Franc, if you've had Petit Syrah, which is usually anything but Petit, how does this wine compare? Syrah, Syrah blends, where is that? Or if there's another grape variety that you'd like to throw out for kicks and giggles, do that, and then think about where you could be. And let's finish voting on this wine. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And let's see where we ended up here. We're mostly in the Syrah blend world. We have a few people that say Cab Franc. I would suggest to you that Cab Francs tend to be very herbal in nature and very leafy in nature, whether it's forest flourish, bay leaf, at times even a little bit minty, sage-ish, etc. This wine to me isn't coming off as much on that. Petit Syrah just generally tends to be girthy and broad, and this wine is a little bit leaner and more svelte in its structure, which leads the Syrah people to probably have it, or the other folks there. And clearly those votes go almost hand in hand with the French choice there, and a little bit California. I mean, you do get some California wines that are there, generally where they make Syrah and do it in this style. In California is further south than where I am, so you're probably going to be closer to Paso or something like that, and in a cooler climate area within that to get that genre of structure. And again, oftentimes blended. You have to ask yourself, does this wine come off as a mono voice or once again as a choir? And it seems to me to be pretty mono by nature. So let's hop in the plane, and let's leave Washington State. Where, by the way, they weren't on the list there, Tim, but they make some pretty awesome Syrah in Washington State, particularly in places like eastern part of the state out in Walla Walla and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But also in the Columbia Valley, I would add. I don't want to shortchange the rest of the Columbia Valley, but we're staying in the north. We're heading back to where we once were in Europe, and we're going to France, and we are landing in the Rhone. We are landing specifically in the northern Rhone Valley, and very specifically in the larger appellation of Creuse-Hermitage, and with the great long rooted in Creuse-Hermitage Fayol family. So Creuse-Hermitage doesn't necessarily get the love, if you will, that Côte Rôtie would get, or Hermitage would get, or some of those others, but it's a fairly robust appellation. It has a lot of volume relative, but historically it was mostly a négoce appellation, and only a handful of people doing a really good job there, all of whom were in the South. The appellation itself is relatively large by Rhone standards, and it started back in the 30s around appropriately the town of Croz, Crozes. Many of these areas annexed the areas there in Hermitage, being close by. They annexed that thing, but the actual town of Croz and Gervin and some 17 villages, townships, if you will, formed the heart of what we call Old Creuse Hermitage, which is pretty much the part of it. Then over time it grew, demand grew, and 20 new towns further north were annexed on. The people in the south, of course, felt those people should have their own appellation because they weren't making wines that were the same or weren't as good. Big fight if you ever get into Creuse Hermitage, but bottom line is when it achieves well, and it makes a wonderful, drum roll please, pure 100% Syrah wine when it's made well. So let's go along and talk to our friends here. As I said before, Laurent Fayol is part of the Fayol establishment of family. They his sixth generation in production and been in charge of the family facilities since the mid 2000s. He makes a really exemplary wine that's there. It comes from two villages, the area around Gervin, which is where the winery is based, and then from the town of Creuse proper, about 60-40 Creuse to Gervin. And it is pure Syrah. It is not a blend. Indeed, you're not blending in this part of the world at all. You are blending in Saint Joseph. You are blending with a little bit of Marsanne Roussanne. You could blend a little bit Côte Rôtie, but it's very, very rare that you see anybody put a droplet of anything white into Creuse Hermitage, which is for all intensive and practical purposes pure Syrah. It is just a lovely effort. This shows you Laurent who really took over. He sort of focused in on about 17 to 20 acres um, of the older vines, which range from 40 to 60 years old, and just does a killer job. Wonderful wine, delicious example, pure Syrah, Northern Rhone. And by Rhone standards these days, it's all relative, but I would say affordable.
Yeah.
Tim, over to you for wine six.
Yeah, boy, that's wonderful wine, Evan. And everybody, that is textbook Northern Rhone Syrah. I know if Maddie were here, Evan, she would say it has the Jimmy Dean factor. So
Mhm.
it's got all the savory, sanguine, sausagey, meaty type qualities, and it's got a lot of pepper. Good stuff and delicious. Okay, everybody, now to wine this six. Let's take a look at those three questions. First of all, and this will play into this wine a lot. How would you describe the fruit character quality of the wine? That's going to be important because I think you're going to find it different from the previous two red wines. Next, I always include this question: what are the important non-fruit aromas and flavors? Yep, helpful for identifying the grape variety. And then finally, how would you describe the texture of the wine and the quality of the tannins? Yeah, and that, of course, will have to do with the grape variety itself, but also, oak treatment and oak aging. So, everybody, let's get started and take your glass tilted over, white background, and it's again very deep color. Very deep. It is ruby, but I want you to see that there's also evolution in the color. There's some garnet here. And the color of the rim is almost crimson, which is, ruby and garnet together. So crimson, fancy term. So what I'm expecting then on the nose is with the fruit quality character, which was that first question there, it's probably going to be a mix of things, and we'll find out. In terms of legs, tears, marangoni, okay. So about half my glass is on vacation. The other half is coming down pretty slow. It stains the glass a little bit, but it's this wine is rich, and I would say it's definitely richer than the previous two red wines. Okay, on the nose, let's check it out. Okay, wow, there's a lot going on. So we'll start with the fruit. It's kind of a mix of red and dark fruit. The red fruit is like red plums, red cherries, what else? Maybe some red currants. But the important thing here is that first question is the character and quality of the fruit. And here it's ripe, but it's also dried, it's stewed, and what else? Maybe even a little raisinated, but that's more of the dark fruit. And the dark fruit is the riper, richer kind too. And so that is black raspberry, black cherry, black plum. And again, it's a mix of it's ripe and it's dried and it's raisinated and even stewed. And that speaks to the color of the wine again, that crimson thing going on with the rim. What else? There's potpourri, there's dried flowers. And that dried quality again connects to the quality of the fruit. And then there's kind of dark leafy greens, almost like kale. There's brown mushrooms, there's red peppers, there's paprika, there's fennel, there's anise. So there's a lot of, very savory type peppery, a little bit of tomato leaf too. Um, and some dried green, there's dried basil, maybe some dried mint. And beyond that, the wine's really quite earthy. It's earth and mineral together. So those of you going back to the Merlot, I want you to smell this wine, hit the Merlot pretty quickly and see the difference in how there's definitely earth qualities in the Merlot, but go to wine six and go, wow. Okay, so the earth here is kind of the main event. And there's also a lot of oak, right? So the oak is pronounced here. And it is, the toast and spice, but there's vanilla. It's almost like sawdust. Even reminds me, dare I say it? Dare. It's almost like sandalwood, even picnic table, so there's a really coarse grained wood and it's really pronounced. Okay. Anything else about it? No. All right. So taste it, please. Okay. Wow. That's a mouthful. First of all, notice, like the previous two red wines, the fruit really tartans up in the palate. All that dark fruit especially got this like dried, stewed blackberry, black cherry, black raspberry, acidic, the stewed, dried. The red fruit got tarted too, and it's like craisin, dried cranberries, maybe dried red cherries, almost like cherry herring. So then there's all the herbal green stuff. There's like tea leaves, black tea leaves. and like bay laurel, dried greens, but beyond that, I mean, you get to that pretty quickly, because then what you're left is this really intense soil, sandy, chalky, terracotta thing going on with the middle of the wine, and then a lot of oak influence, right? It's sawdusty, it's spicy, smoky, and all right, I'm going to taste again for the structure. Hmm. All right. So remember with the Merlot, I said, wow, a lot of color, skinny tears though, and only 13.8 alcohol. This has the highest alcohol of any wine in flight. It's easily 14.5, right? What else about it? It's got some evolution. The end of it is there's some leathery qualities coming out, dried mushrooms, things like that. But it's acidic, so it's a grape or a blend of things that have acid. The acid's medium plus. The tannins, though, interestingly enough, it's not that tannic, right? So it's maybe medium plus tannin, medium plus plus. But for wine with this kind of color, it's interesting. So that helps you. It's a combination of things that hopefully will guide you. All right, let's see what our choices are. The finish is long and the complexity is high. This is really quite good wine. Really is. Okay, your choices, should you decide to vote, and I hope you will. Sangiovese blend from Italy, from Tuscany probably. A Tempranillo blend from Spain, from a number of different places. A Syrah blend from France, possibly. And then California and Australia could do all three of those things, no doubt. Okay, so everybody please vote. And this wine is really delicious.
Yeah. Got to finish strong, as they say. But it's interesting, if there's a thread and a theme here, there's such clear delineation across
Mm-hmm.
6 very uniquely different wines
Yeah,
today here. But this is well, I wanted to finish this one. I'll be curious to get the feedback and once we find out what it
yeah,
is. But it's an awesome glass of wine.
yeah. It's incredible balance and just intensity on the finish that won't let go. Really long. All right, so everybody, let's see what we have. So Evan, you want to count us down?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what do we got on the votes?
Here we are. So a lot of people
Tempranillos
went,
have it.
yeah, a lot of people went to Tempranillo and Blend and went to Spain, which is great. Sangiovese and Syrah, we just had a Syrah. But that has happened before. I want to say that. Sangiovese blend, I think to me, what gives this away here is the oak treatment, because again, I was describing American oak, which to me smells and tastes like bourbon. But let's get on the jet. I don't think we have too far to go this time. And in fact, we could get there by dinner, no problem.
Yeah.
So we're in the Northern Rhone, which is beautiful, by the way. And I was there about a year ago. And we're going to hop on the plane. I don't think there is a airport near 10 Hermitage, but who knows?
Yeah, you have
And
to go to Lyon. Yeah, you have to
yeah,
go there
yeah.
as well.
So we're gonna fly across the Pyrenees and we're gonna go to Rioja. And this is a small family-owned house that's called Giron Mi Lugar. Mi Lugar is my place. And this is a winery that is owned by the Perez Cuevas families. This particular wine is their Reserva. It's 2018 vintage, which is amazing. So this wine is 6 years old already. What else can I say about it? It's so that most of the grapes are coming from Domaine Ontignon, which is one of the great respected houses in what is Rioja Oriental, which used to be the Rioja Baja, but that is the furthest south of the three subregions in Rioja. And usually, not this time, the warmest, that has the most Mediterranean climate, the lowest elevation, and the most Garnacha planted. Here, not so. So these vineyards are all at 1,800 to 2,000 feet. And this is 90% Tempranillo and 10% Garnacha. It's aged for 2 years in a mix of American and French oak, but I think judging from the nose and palate, it's probably 60 to 70% American oak, although not a lot of it new. And, again, these are low yielding, high altitude vineyards. It's all hand harvesting. The fermentation is in micro lots, and then it's blended before it goes, after malolactic, before it goes into barrel. And it's really just superb wine.
Yeah,
Yep.
and what's interesting about this wine and where it sort of stands out differently in the sort of day of modern Rioja evolves as well too, is one, it hits what they call the new category of vino municipio, which comes from a single township. And if you noticed
Mhm.
on the label, so go back to that. It says it comes from the town of Quel,
Yep.
Quel. That's the name of
Yep.
the space. So not only is it from a single zone, which it used to be Riojas were blended across zones. This is not only from a single zone, if you will, zona, but it comes from a single township as well in Rio de Cal. And the wine actually, you'll notice, doesn't say Reserva or anything on the label. And the hot new category in Rioja these days is which has got the most awful name of all, called generico or generic, which means that you're breaking the rules a little bit. Here it is
Right.
by virtue of barrel sizes and time involved. Legally, this fits everything that could, to your point, Tim, be a reserva. But they have
Yeah.
chosen to opt out of being a reserva because a reserva means everything has to be in 225-liter barrique barrels, and this isn't. So this has some larger barrels and small barrels, et cetera. And the combination by law kicks it out of doing that. They believe that they can make a better wine doing it. And I would say
Yeah.
that the results speak for themselves. But the family and everything, by the way, it's all gravitationally done, is on the
Mm.
hill. It's an amazing family, the Pettis Cuevas family. And Raquel, who's the one I know, she's on the far right. She's the
Mm.
who overleads the family these days.
Yeah. What's interesting to me, this is kind of parallel tracking what happened to Tuscany with Vino de Tavola in, the 1960s and 70s, is that this generico thing, I think that the Spanish government, the Consejo, is going to have to do something to
Yeah,
accommodate.
there should be a contest to pick a new name. Other than that, because I think
Yeah.
maybe the way it translates in Spanish and the way it translates in English, generico might mean something different to them than it does
Yeah.
to us. But I've told them multiple times, generic isn't the best word to use here. But
No.
this whole sort of revolution and evolution into sort of stretching the rules like they did in Tuscany or Ribera del Duero, Viña de la Tierra de Castilla y León, and all that is very much a trend that you're seeing a lot of these very heavily regulated areas having to adopt to make much more interesting wines. So
Yeah.
anyway, with that, Tim, we're going to jump into, we're going to, until next time, a couple of thoughts, and then we're going to enter the happy half hour so you can spend some time with us. Number one, kit 154A next month. We're going to be a little later next month. We're going to be on the 24th. Hopefully, Madeline will be back with us at that point in time. But another fun kit, same bat time, same bat channel, if you will, albeit on a different day. I noticed a couple of comments from some of you saying that this was a little bit more out there in terms of the difficulty of the wines, an interesting flight of wines. But whether it's Gruner Veltliner, whether it's Rioja, whether it's Merlot from Washington State, all of those are what you would call testable, if you will, and textbook
Yeah.
styles of wine. So, but for those of you who are training, who are just come off of your at passing your master's theory and are getting ready for that, or getting in your advanced, or even going to your certified, we do have kits that are a much more narrowed choice thing where you're not going to find wines that may not make it into our kit because they're not testable, but they're interesting and they're delicious to do that. You do want to focus in on that. You could buy those in 6 packs or 12 packs. And that has, Tim, I don't know if you know, but this has been a runaway category, whereas at least I guess a lot of people
Good.
are testing, which is great. And then our other slide, Tim, I'm going to ask you to jump in with me because Tim alluded to this and this tasting, and literally, indeed, this last wine is what we call an evil dwarf, and I'll
Oh,
let you
yeah.
talk about it in a minute. But I want you to note, team, that we've got two classes on this. The red class is next week, and it is on Tuesday at 5 o'clock Pacific time. We are essentially sold out. There are literally two kits left. That's the upside. The downside is if you order one of those two kits by virtue of the QR code at the bottom, you're not going to get it in time for the class, but you can go back and watch the recording. And I can trust you, having done enough of these with the recording before, you get a lot out of it still by doing it. So it's a nice complement for that. And this will hold through with that QR code until Monday, at which point in time the QR code will switch over from red dwarfs, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, to white dwarfs, Snow White and the Seven White Dwarfs, as we move into the bookmark other side of it, which are the Evil Dwarfs White, which will be on May 9th And again, there's ample time. We're just starting selling that kit on Tuesday. Or if it makes sense to do them in a set, which I would highly recommend you do, you would do that. So Tim, before we get into the happy half hour, any thoughts on why people might want to consider doing this very interesting side by side of Evil Dwarf tastings, and what does that really mean?
Well, Evan Goldstein, it's the subset of white and red wines that give students nightmares. All right. So, in fact, when we were tasting the whites, several of you said, "Oh my God, I went to Sauvignon Blanc instead of Gruner Veltliner, or I went to Chenin Blanc or Riesling or whatever." So, I mean, this is literally tasting these wines in a set, and really, and it's focusing on the three things that I think are important. First of all, we just talked about fruit character and quality as that relates to place, but then we talk about impact compounds, which are the things that we talk about throughout these tastings: the pyrazines, the flowers, the spices, the pepper, the use of oak, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, focusing on the structure and how the wines in each set are all really different in terms of combinations of structural elements. So yeah,
Excellent.
don't miss it, and it's going to be fun. Both good.
And Tim will be driving that. Obviously, it's grounded in lessons in his book Message in the Bottle, which if you don't have it, get it. If you buy it with a kit, you get a spiff on both of them. We like to do that for our students and friends that do that. But Tim will be driving that. I will be moderator in crime, but really this is Tim's show. I'm looking forward to doing it, Tim, because I always learn a lot when I taste with you, and it should be a lot of fun. So with that.